Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I'll be your flight instructor today, and we are diving right into our post-flight debrief to make sure you are absolutely ready for your upcoming check ride. Look, flying is all about preparation, and mastering emergency operations, well, that's exactly what separates a good pilot from a truly safe one. So today, we are going to put your knowledge to the test.
Here is our debrief checklist for today's session. We'll be running through the power-off glide approach, then the zero-flap approach, digging into the crucial safety differences between the two, and wrapping up with your final check ride clearance. We're focusing heavily on the critical procedures for landing with idle power versus landing with a clean wing.
All right, Section 1, the power-off or glide approach. This is an absolutely essential skill for surviving an unexpected engine failure, and it fundamentally changes how your aircraft handles. I want to start by testing your knowledge with a direct exam review question straight out of Chapter 33. Think about it for a second. Without power to control your descent, how do you expect your flight path and your nose attitude to change compared to a normal power-on approach?
The reality is, on a normal approach, you're using power to carefully control your descent rate right down to the aim point, but without power, your descent rate is naturally going to be much, much greater. This means your nose pitch attitude has to be lower just to maintain your approach speed. The direct result of all this is a significantly steeper flight path down to the runway, which means you're going to need a much more pronounced flare right at the end to arrest that steep descent.
Now, let's think about your positioning in the traffic pattern. If your flight path is suddenly way steeper because your engine is out, how should your distance from the runway on your base leg compare to a standard approach?
To safely hit your aim point on that steeper path, you literally have to cut the corner. You've got to make your downwind leg shorter, turn onto the base leg earlier, and fly closer to the field than you normally would. This is especially vital if you're dealing with strong headwinds. If you don't turn base sooner, you're going to end up completely undershooting the runway.
So the real secret here is mastering your descent point on that base leg using the PAT checklist. First, P for power off, and don't forget to turn your carburetor heat hot. Then A for attitude. You're going to maintain your altitude until your speed bleeds off to best glide, and then pitch for that glide attitude. Finally, T for trim. You want to trim it out so the airplane is practically flying itself at that best glide speed.
But let's be real for a minute. Things out there don't always go perfectly. Let's say you judge the wind wrong. What are your exact maneuvers if you end up too high on final, or worse, hopelessly low? Okay, if you realize you're high, you've got options. You can extend some flap, lower the nose to keep your speed, and retrim. You could also turn slightly away from the field or throw in a side slip or S-turns to steepen your path and burn off that excess altitude. If you're just a little low, you can delay dropping your flaps or cut your base leg even shorter. But listen to me carefully. If you are hopelessly low on a practice approach, you have to swallow your pride, apply power, and go around. A bruised eagle is a whole lot cheaper than replacing the landing gear. Never try to force it.
There's a really smart technique for aiming too. When you start a glide approach, you should actually intend to overshoot. Aim well down the runway, like 500 feet past the threshold, so you are deliberately coming in high. Then, as you visually confirm you've got the field made, you progressively lower your landing flaps in stages. This essentially walks your aim point right back to the threshold. Trust me, it is so much easier to steepen an approach with flaps than it is to flatten it out when you have zero power.
I really need to emphasize this golden rule directly from the manual. Never, ever pull back on the yoke to try and stretch a glide. It is a fatal trap. Pulling back just kills your airspeed, and when you get too slow, your flight path actually steepens even more, causing you to sink right into the dirt short of the runway.
Moving on to Section 2, the zero-flap approach. Let's see how our techniques flip for an entirely different emergency scenario. Imagine your flap motor burns out or you lose electrical power.
Pulling from Chapter 34 for your next review question. If your flap system completely fails, how do your flight path and approach speed change compared to a normal, full flap approach?
Well, the zero-flap approach is basically the exact opposite of the glide approach we just covered. A clean wing without flaps generates much less drag. That means your flight path is going to be significantly flatter. And because your stalling speed is higher without those flaps, you've got to fly a higher approach speed, typically adding about 5 knots to all your standard pattern speeds. You'll also be flying with a higher nose attitude, which means your forward visibility is reduced. Plus, with so little drag, get ready for a much longer float over the runway before the wheels finally touch down.
To fly this flatter path, you have to adjust your pattern. Because your descent is so incredibly shallow without flaps, you can't turn base at your normal point.
You actually have to extend your downwind leg by an extra 5 seconds or so before making your base turn. That gives you the necessary distance to gradually descend toward the runway.
So, let's put you back in the hot seat. You're on a zero flap final, and you suddenly realize you're too high. And obviously you can't just dump flaps to create drag and drop down. What is your primary maneuver to fix this safely?
As the training manual perfectly puts it, without flaps, the airplane is incredibly slippery. It just wants to keep flying. If you just point the nose down to lose altitude, you're going to pick up a massive amount of excess airspeed that takes forever to bleed off. Your absolute safest, most effective tool here is executing a forward slip. Flying the plane slightly sideways introduces a ton of aerodynamic drag, allowing you to steepen your descent and drop that altitude without dangerously accelerating.
All right, Section 3, Crucial Safety Differences. Let's consolidate all of this. We've looked at both extremes, so let's directly compare the safety aspects so you never mix up these procedures under pressure.
When you put these two patterns side by side, the contrast is huge. For the power-off glide, your path is super steep. You have to turn base early and cut it close so you don't sink short. But for the zero-flap approach, your path is flat. You have to intentionally push your downwind out 5 extra seconds so you don't wildly overshoot. They require completely opposite spatial judgments.
You also have to deeply respect the unique aerodynamic risks of each scenario. The glide approach demands laser-focused airspeed monitoring because stalling speeds go up in gliding turns. And when you flare, your elevators are going to feel super sluggish without that propeller slipstream washing over them. On the flip side, the zero-flap approach brings a very high risk of a tail strike because your nose is pitched up so high. In fact, that high nose means you might completely lose visual sight of the runway threshold on short final.
If you take away anything from today's debrief to keep yourself safe, let it be these 2 things. Number 1, always err in favor of overshooting your aim point on a glide approach. It is always better to land a bit long than crash short. Number 2, on a zero-flap approach, if the nose blocks your view of the threshold, absolutely do not push the nose down just to see it. Maintain your attitude and trust your peripheral vision out the side windows to judge your flare.
Section 4, Final Check Ride Clearance. We are wrapping up our review now, and I want to make sure you have the core philosophy locked in before you get back into the left seat. The overarching theme across both of these emergencies boils down to this. Whether you are dropping toward the earth without power or floating endlessly over the numbers without flaps, rigorous airspeed control and situational judgment are your ultimate lifesavers. Knowing when to slip, knowing when to use flaps, and having the judgment to just go around when you are hopelessly low will quite literally save your life.
I'm going to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on before your actual check ride. We studied these 2 emergencies in isolation today, but what if the absolute worst happened? What if you lost your engine and your electrical system failed, jamming your flaps at the exact same time? How would you synthesize these 2 entirely different, contradictory techniques to put that plane safely on the ground? Think through that combination, and you'll be ready for anything. Good luck on the check ride!